is Keys to the Shop, episode 184, How to Make Great Business Decisions with Dave Stachowiak. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and welcome to this episode. I'm glad you decided to join us today. In fact, we are talking about decision making, so that was a great decision, number one. So good first step. And we're going to be talking about frameworks for great decision making in business and how that all is driven by your vision. And laying that out for us is past guest, friend of the show and a friend of mine, Dave Stachowiak. And I'm really excited to present this interview because I think it's going to be really, really helpful to a lot of you out there. So, stick around for that. Now, of course, if you have not subscribed to Keys to the Shop, I would encourage you, please do so. Just hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And that way, anytime a new episode is uploaded, you will be alerted to that and you'll be up to date. Now, one of the decisions that we have to make in business, of course, is what kind of equipment we are going to be putting in the shop. And that is not a decision that you should take lightly. You need experts in your corner who can help you make the right decision. And for that, I would encourage you to turn to our sponsor here, Keys to the Shop, Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the world's best specialty coffee equipment suppliers, and why they're one of the best is because every ounce of their effort goes into curating the best equipment from all over the world and to fit it exactly with the needs of their customers. They take that very seriously. They have a lot of in-house expertise to make sure that whatever you end up purchasing fits with the needs of your business, wherever you might be. So if you're just looking to open your first store or you're expanding your operations, they definitely can help you out with espresso machines, grinders, commercial coffee equipment, plus under-counter refrigeration, so kind of both ends of the commercial equipment spectrum. The first step that you're going to want to make is to go to their website, prima-coffee.com, and on there you will find not only an amazing selection of equipment, both home and commercial, but also you're going to find some really great resources in both article and video form to help you understand the equipment and brew better coffee, which is really what they're about, helping you be successful in brewing great coffee every time. So go to the website, prima-coffee.com. Tell them that you heard about them here on this show, and I just know that this is going to be a really great decision for you to work with them. prima-coffee.com. This show is also brought to you today by the people who are giving your customers really amazing choices for plant-based beverages when they come to your coffee shop, and that is none other than the Pacific Barista Series. The Pacific Barista Series is designed specifically for professional baristas and the standards for excellence that they demand from their products. You can be using the coconut, oat, rice, soy, or oat milk. In either case, you're going to be working with something that gives you amazing texture, great for latte art. It's going to be able to take the heat from steaming, and it's going to also keep the flavor balance of the beverage focused on coffee. All told, the Barista Series is the leading plant-based beverage for your cafe for a reason. It performs so well because they put so much heart and research and detail into each launch, into each product. So I would encourage you, get these products in your shop. Try the Pacific Barista Series with your coffees. See how they make them shine. See how your customers like them. See how your staff like them. I have a feeling that they're going to be a big hit. So go to pacificfoods.com. Follow the link in the show notes as well. And a huge thank you to Pacific for your support of Keys to the Shop. Okay, so today we are going to be diving into the topic of making decisions in business. And of course, when you're operating a business, when you're running a shop, there are tons of decisions that have to be made every day, from the mundane to the pretty important. Well, they're all important, really, but every little thing matters. Everything kind of factors into the way the business is going to grow up in the future. So 5 to 10 years from now, what your business is going to look like is dependent on the decisions that you make today and so forth. And so the question is, how do you make great decisions? What are we basing the word great on? How do we know if the quality of our decisions matches the quality that we want to see in our business 5 to 10 years from now? It's a really good question, and it's a question that I pose to my friend and past guest on the show, Dave Stachowiak. He was a past guest here talking about mastering the art of training, which is a fantastic episode. You should go back and listen to that. But he is back on the show today to kind of help us in this question, and it does a fantastic job. Now, if you're not familiar with who Dave Stachowiak is, he is the host and the founder of Coaching for Leaders, which is a top-rated management podcast, one of my absolute favorites and kind of the one that got me started in the idea of actually podcasting myself. So always really special to talk to Dave. His podcast has been downloaded 10 million times with more than 15 years of leadership at Dale Carnegie and a thriving global leadership academy. Dave helps leaders discover practical wisdom, build meaningful relationships, and create movement for genuine results. Kind of what we're all really looking for, right? Dave is also the founder of Coaching for Leaders Academy, which is a year-long leadership development cohort. The Academy is an intimate group of managers, executives, and business owners who work personally with Dave and other participant leaders to develop their leadership excellence and empower each other through global relationship building. Dave holds a doctoral degree in organizational leadership from Pepperdine University and has won several international business leadership awards from Dale Carnegie. And I have learned so much from Dave just by listening to his podcast and also having plenty of conversations with him about podcasting, about business. And I knew that this was a great topic to throw at him. And he has laid out such a great insights in this conversation around the idea of vision, developing courage, the idea of accountability and community and more. And at the end of this, you're going to be equipped to go forward and make better decisions for yourself and for your business. And I'm really excited to present this to you. So without further ado, here now is my conversation about making great business decisions with Dave Stachowiak. Well, Dave, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. Great to have you as always.
Chris, I'm so glad to be back. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Of course, being a longtime listener of your show and fan, there are so many different leaders and topics that you tackle on Coaching for Leaders, and also in your own practice of coaching individuals who are in leadership positions. This topic of making decisions or having kind of a framework to operate from in making decisions, I think, is something that people in coffee could benefit from a lot. And, we've been talking about, what this looks like, and I'm excited to dive into this this content, because once people grasp this, I think they're really going to have a bit more of a handle on how to handle maybe seemingly ambiguous things that have big impact in their decision-making processes, especially when they're under pressure. I think a lot of people are under a lot of pressure to be quick decision makers and maybe don't give it as much thought as they need to. One of the things I think that you and I talked about was vision, and that's kind of a word that is thrown around a lot in people's LinkedIn titles. They're visionaries, and it comes up in decision making a lot. Your experience is that most people don't actually have a vision that they can let guide them, and they don't even have one written down, really. I think maybe a good place to start would be here. How does that lack of a vision or even a written vision impact our decisions in business? Why should we start there when we're kind of building a framework?
Well, thanks for framing that, Chris. I agree with you. I think this is something a lot of us struggle with. And can I just say up front that the word vision, the first time someone told me to write a vision, I had the response of like, really? Like, that seems kind of touchy-feely, squishy sort of a thing. Do I really need a vision for like my business, my life, like that? Let's get down to the nuts and bolts of this, right? So I say that because I suspect, like me, there's folks listening to this conversation who are thinking like, well, vision. I don't like that's the kind of thing like a Fortune 500 company does, and they have the mission statement on the wall and all those kinds of things. And I think there's a lot we can do with what we might call a vision or we might call a business plan that can really be practical, especially for a small business owner. And so I'm really excited for us to dive in on that, and for someone who's running a coffee business or a store, maybe multiple stores, that they have a framework to latch onto to make better decisions. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but that's the first thing that came to mind as I was thinking of us having this conversation.
Right. Yeah. This is definitely critical. And it's not, maybe it is touchy feely, and that's fine. Because, well, first of all, a lot of coffee people are just that way anyway. It's, in my experience, it's been accepted, that we're maybe, it's a relationship type of business structure. And, but it does come off as, I think sometimes to have a mission statement or vision, or that kind of comes off as a corporate thing, and people don't want it necessarily, or don't put a lot of value in having one because they don't see the return on the investment. So like having the vision written down and developing one, what are the pros of that, where people are a little bit misguided if they think that they can just kind of launch into a successful business venture and also make great decisions without one?
Yeah, first and foremost, it helps us to make better decisions because we know what we're trying to achieve. And the analogy that I often use is, imagine you were hiring someone to build a home for you. You probably wouldn't show up at the builder's office and say, hey, I'd like to build a nice home. Go for it. Right? What you would do is you would go in first and you would hire an architect. And that architect would work with you and your family over the course of days and weeks and months and draw out a very detailed plan of exactly what you wanted to see emerge for this home you were building. And once that was pretty well detailed, then you would take those plans to the person who would actually do the building, who would be almost certainly someone else. And that would change, right? Like as you got into the actual building, those plans are going to change. You're going to find out that you can't put a wall here for whatever reason, or the staircase that you wanted in this part of the house because of whatever's going on logistically. It's maybe you're going to have to make some adjustments. But because you start with a detailed plan, you're able to make better decisions in the moment of where you're going. And that, for me, is the power of a vision. We are really good at doing that for things, buildings, airplanes, model railroads, whatever we're building, of having a really detailed plan and blueprint to figure out what needs to be assembled. We are pretty poor, most of us, at doing that for ourselves or doing that for our organizations, of creating that kind of clarity. And the pushback I often hear when we talk about vision is, well, I just don't know what the future is going to look like. I don't know what 2 years out is going to look like because the business isn't there yet. And and of course, the reality is going to change. But starting with a clear picture of where you want to go gives you a better ability to be able to make decisions in the moment that support that longer term objective. And it also helps you to make better decisions with the resources that you have.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it seems like your future would be a little less uncertain if you had a little bit more of a design hand in it. Like you would create your future, so to speak, or at least have a little bit more of a created portion of your future.
Yes. And you also mentioned two other words that we should probably define, Chris, before we go too much further, which was mission and purpose, or maybe I mentioned them. The distinction I see between vision and mission or purpose, by the way, I think those terms are synonymous. I know some people do make the distinction between mission and purpose, but the mission and purpose is basically what gets me out of bed. And the vision is where am I going? And I think that's true for an organization too. The mission or purpose is like, what are we, for a coffee shop, what's the experience we want to provide today when our customer shows up is the mission and the purpose. And the vision is, what does this business look like in 2 years, 3 years down the road? And I think it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. And in fact, it probably shouldn't be any more complicated than that.
Why is it that it shouldn't be?
I think we get too bogged down in that things need to be really complex. And by making them so complex, we fail to execute on the simple but important items. So let me give an example. You go to a local bank to get a loan to open a coffee shop for a business, and the bank rightfully says, we want to see your business plan before we're going to grant you this loan. And so you do your due diligence and write up a 30 or 40-page business plan, as all the business books advise that you do, and most of the financial institutions want to see. And that's a really important exercise to go through because it gets you thinking and helps you clarify what's most important. The challenge is then operationally, 3 months later, when you're making a business decision, the chances you're going to pull out that plan that morning when you're making a decision and go find page 34 that kind of speaks to that specific piece is, in my experience, pretty unlikely because it's so complicated, it's so detailed, that it's almost more complex than for its own good. So by all means, do that if you need to do that for the financial institutions or whoever that's a stakeholder that needs to see that. And then take the next step to create something that is one, maybe 2 pages. That's here's what 2 to 3 years looks like. And I do like that time frame of 2 to 3 years because I think it gets far enough along where you're willing to look at the longer term perspective and not just make decisions for today's problem. And it's also not too far out that it doesn't seem attainable. I think 2 to 3 years for most of us and most of our organizations is a really good time to zero in on. So if that vision can be a page or two of here's what that 2 to 3 year reality looks like, that then serves as a much more practical guide for how I make decisions today, tomorrow, the next staff meeting, whatever the current reality is.
That's a good way of thinking about it. When you have a business plan for the bank, it's usually to get a loan, and it doesn't usually end up being an operations manual, so to speak, or a tactical manual for your everyday use. Maybe because it's so giant, depending on how much work you put into it. By having sort of your own alternative business plan, recycling it, not recycling it, but redoing it every couple of years and renewing what your goals are every couple, 2 to 3 years. That sounds like the kind of thing that you would want to do for your staff. You want them to have manuals. You want them to have guides and standard operating procedures. Why not you as the owner of the business and the operator of the business?
Indeed. There's a great book called Vivid Vision by Cameron Herold. He's been a guest on our show, and he teaches business leaders how to write what he calls a vivid vision. And it's essentially what you just described, Chris. It's written out of, here's what I like the future to look like. And he also makes the invitation to hand it out to employees, hand it out to customers, hand it out to other stakeholders in the community. So they know where you're heading to. It should be the kind of a document, the kind of a vision that multiple stakeholders are going to be able to get behind. And that's not to say there are things, of course, in all of our organizations that we don't necessarily make public. So there may be a public version of it, and there may be an internal version of it. But that transparency then allows the other stakeholders in the business, the other owners, if there's owners, the customers, the employees, to get behind something bigger other than just perhaps having an hourly job or some other more limited emotional investment in the organization.
So when you put this together, when you're trying to create this framework and codify it into this document, and really into your own mind, you can have this as a reference as you're making decisions that affect the future of your business. There are a few things that you're going to probably have to think about, including in there as sort of this is how we do business, sort of are the ethos of how things are done. You're a fan of experimentation in business, trying new things and seeing what works. You have to, in fact, you talked about having to do a lot of different things, see if it works for your business. And when I hear that, I think there's a lot of people doing lots of things, but maybe they're doing lots of things poorly. Like, what's the line between doing a lot of things as kind of thoughtful, experimental process that fits with your vision versus just sort of trying a lot of things and hoping it works?
Yeah, I think the first place is us getting some level of comfort, all of us, which is I'm going to really intentionally try things that I think are going to work well and that I'm going to fail as a business owner. That's just the reality of doing this. And that's a key distinction from I'm just trying stuff for the sake of trying stuff is not a good strategy, right? Trying stuff that I really do think is going to work. So it's not just trying things and experimenting for the sake of experimenting. It's trying things that I really think are going to work, and not being afraid to test stuff. And it's in the context of the vision. So that's where having the clarity of what the future reality 2 to 3 years looks like, and I've got a document of a page or two that describes that in some detail of like, what do I think the 2 to 3 years looks like for this coffee shop, for this business, for whatever, and maybe it's different for each location, or maybe it's for the entire business as a whole. Because then the experimenting comes down to what's going to get us there to that 2 to 3 years. So I know where I'm heading in 2 to 3 years. Now, what am I going to do in the next quarter, this week, the next 90 days, whatever the right time frame is, that action is going to be an action that's going to support that 2 to 3 year target. And I, as a business owner, am going to do my very best to begin an action that I think is going to get there. Also knowing that some of the things I'm going to try probably aren't going to work. But the way I think we all figure that out in business is we try it and we get some feedback and we learn, and either we keep going or we change. And I think that's the thing, Chris, is that I see that when I think about the people that I work with and the folks in our community of like, what's the difference maker of the people who have a lot of success and move through it pretty quickly and the folks who seem stagnant, is it's not that the first group have better ideas, it's that they're more willing to move. So they move on something and they find out pretty quickly, like, oh, that worked, or oh, that didn't work at all, or some version in between. And then they stop and try something else that's going to get to the 2 to 3 year goal. Or they iterate on what worked or didn't work. And I find myself telling our clients all the time, I'd rather you move in the wrong direction than stay stagnant. Because even if you do something and it doesn't work, you learn what doesn't work in your business, you develop some courage, you get yourself in the habit of taking action, you learn to apologize if you do something that really doesn't work with employees or with customers. It gets you into conversations by necessity that force you to learn. And that's what one of the biggest competencies for being a business owner is learning and being responsive to all the stakeholders in the business, especially customers.
So you have to take risks. You have to stay moving, which inevitably means taking more risks, which means you have to have the guts to do it, or at least develop the guts to do it, because when you first start out, it's so new and it's expensive. Failure in the first experience of it might seem like, if that happens, then it's the end. And I don't want to risk that. So I'm going to clutch the wheel. I'm going to, whatever analogy we can think of that involves just not budging from where I view success to be. But it seems like the world changes anyway around you, whether you change or not. Kind of like the movie Up.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what is it that we need to do to get over that fear of moving? What's that progression like?
Starting really small. Because the tendency for a lot of us who find ourselves as business owners and who want to do something great in the world is we've oftentimes we're the kinds of people that have been high achievers. We want to take on a lot. We have a capacity to do a lot, or at least we've convinced ourselves that we do. And we want to go big or go home. And that's a great attitude to have about life. And it's really contrary to how behavior works in learning. We're really, when you think about making behavior changes, as human beings, we do a much better job at making a lot of smaller shifts than we do trying to change something massively. I mean, just think about trying to change habits on sleep and exercise and eating well. A lot of us struggle with those for ourselves. And we're not even talking about anyone else or an organization. I mean, just our own personal behavior and things like that. That's really hard for a lot of us to change. And what works well for a lot of people is changing one thing at a time. And what I find myself doing, Chris, with our clients, ironically, is they'll come in our sessions for insights on goals and actions they're planning to take. And I find in our conversations, oftentimes we're trying to get them to do less, to aim lower initially.
Yes.
And rather than trying to, someone who has this beautiful plan to thought through of like, okay, over the next, 45 days, we're going to do all these big things. And it's quite possible by day 2, that plan isn't going to be viable anymore because you've learned a bunch of stuff you didn't know today. And that's really demotivating. If you've put together all this time and energy to create this grandiose plan, and then all of a sudden something doesn't quite work. So we tend to go the opposite way when, not only in our own business, but as we're coaching people, is, hey, I think we want to go this direction in the business. What's the smallest minimum, like what Eric Ries would call in the lean startup, what's the minimum viable product, the smallest iteration we can make, where if we do this, we can get some kind of feedback. So it might be, rather than, for example, in a coffee shop, rather than changing the entire breakfast menu and going through a whole process of thinking that through and spending 90 days going through that and rolling out an entirely new menu, what if we put on one new sandwich this morning and just see what happens?
Right.
Do people notice? Do they care? Do they like it? Do they ignore it? Do they hate it? And just kind of testing things out for a bit and testing for a few days and then looking at the data that emerges from that and then saying, okay, now that we have some data and we've actually talked to people, we've gotten some feedback, we made this really, really small iteration that gets us to maybe the longer term goal of having this very different menu experience for our customers. Now that I've got some data and I've talked to people and I've gone around the shop and I've talked to people who ordered the sandwich about what they liked, what they didn't, what was the experience. Now maybe I add something else, or I've learned don't do that. Yeah. And instead of it being a sandwich, maybe I think of, okay, what do we need to do differently with drinks? Or something else entirely. But before I've spent all this time emotionally, financially putting together a big grandiose plan, let me make the smallest iteration change I can in the context of the larger vision that gives me some data points that help me then to determine what's going to be the next step.
That's a great way to put it. And my mind automatically goes to, flying by sonar. If I'm a bat, I have to, get the reflective signals off of the things that I'm going to fly into or around or aim at. I have to get the feedback from that. And that helps me and guides me in the dark where I can't see. And I guess you could make bigger decisions more confidently in the future when you have a better idea of what the dimensions of the vehicle are that you're actually driving. It really, I'm more confident parking my own car than a rental. It's just the way it is.
Right, exactly. Once you know how customers are going to react, how employees are going to react, once you have more data points around something you're trying to do, then you can move more deliberately and I think with more confidence. But I know you and I had planned about talking about taking risks today a bit as a business owner. I don't want to take any more risk than I need to. I want to take a lot of risks, but each one of those risks is really, really small. So I'm changing one item on a menu versus changing the entire menu. I'm doing one small iteration versus changing the entire schedule for all the employees in the organization. I'm testing something out with a new schedule on a Saturday afternoon versus on a Monday morning, right? To test that out and test out a new system first. And so I may very well fail. And in fact, I hope to fail a bunch because that's an indicator to me that I'm trying new stuff and I am taking risks. But I want those failures to be really, really small. So it's an apology or two, or it's an inconvenience, and it's not something that's going to have someone never come back to the business or never want to work there. So the failures are small. So the things that work, then we double down and we do those and we move more confidently on. And the things that don't work, we apologize and abandon them and move on. And so for me, all of those decisions are in the context of the larger vision. Like I'm not going to experiment with stuff that isn't a part of the 2 to 3 year vision, but the actual actions and behaviors themselves are really, really small at the beginning so that then I can learn from that and learn from others. And like you said, getting the sonar pings back and getting a better picture of like, what do people want? What's going to work not only for my employees, but for customers. That's huge if I can do that and stay disciplined to do that as a business owner.
You have somewhat of a catch-22 as a business owner, in that they say it's lonely at the top, and maybe you're listening to podcasts, for example, or you're on a community online, but really a lot of the times you just find yourself being the one where the buck stops, and it's hard to develop yourself personally and build a habit when all that is within you screams to just use the habits that you've already developed as to lean on when you're going forward with something like building a business and making decisions about business. Within the topic of risk, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between courage and confidence and how something like that develops, because as you're talking about these practices, so much of the personality and the default attitudes and mindsets of the owner are going to determine whether or not these things are a reality in the company's system. I guess it would have to be a part of your personality first. How should we approach that, and how have you seen that develop? In what order?
Yeah, so I haven't figured a way around it not to be how to have confidence without first being courageous. So that then begs the question, well, what can I do to have more courage? And this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, is starting really small, right? If I have a fear of speaking in front of people, starting off by going to a tryout for the show at the community theater and being in front of 1,000 people for the first performance is probably not the best starting point for tackling that fear. When people are working through fears, one of the things they often do is, just small exposures to things a little bit more over time. And I think that's a wonderful way to develop courage. So, for example, let's make this real practical. I want to give better feedback to my employees. I know that's something that a lot of us struggle with as business owners of, I want to give feedback to this person, but I don't necessarily feel comfortable handling conflict. I don't feel comfortable maybe saying something that that they may react poorly to. And so I think the place to not start with that is to not go to the most difficult employee you have and to try that first, right?
Right.
That's the once you've developed a little bit of confidence, then that's the situation to handle. So the easier thing to do is where can I just get used to speaking up more? And when I'm coaching people on doing something like that, we'll often try to find what's the lowest risk situation that you could start speaking up that would just get you used to doing it. Maybe not even in the business context. In fact, probably better not in the context of business at all. So I've had conversations with clients who are working on speaking up of find an opportunity to speak up when you're in the checkout line at the grocery store. So instead of just saying yes, I'll do that, or if something doesn't go right, speak up and ask a question, or maybe even ask a challenging question to a store clerk, or if someone says, do you want this handled that way, or if something doesn't work with the meal you received at a restaurant, be willing to speak up about it, and oftentimes where we'll start is find one time a day that you can speak up. Doesn't need to be in the business context, just anywhere. Because once you get used to doing that, and you've done that for a couple of weeks, once a day, in all kinds of different contexts, you start to train your brain that, when I speak up, generally speaking, nothing bad happens. And in fact, oftentimes something good happens. I get something that I needed, or something gets addressed that needed to be addressed. And then that's the point where we'll then start, okay, now who's the employee that you could start to give some feedback to? Let's start there. So it's a gradual process, much like what we were talking about earlier as far as experimenting. It's developing the courage to start in one place and then move forward to the point where you start to feel more confidence when you're handling situations of giving tough feedback.
Brilliant. Yeah. I mean, it seems like you are developing a ability to be less risk averse personally in order for you to develop the habit of being willing to take those risks in your business, which is just an extension of yourself, really. When you start a business, so much of it is a distillation of who you are. And of course, as we're talking about the vision, and as you're talking about this, I'm thinking back to some of the excerpts I've heard from James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits. You recently, I think, within the last few months, had him on the show, Coaching for Leaders, and he was talking about one of my main takeaways from all I've listened to is that you identify as that thing that you want to do continually. In other words, if I want to be running all the time, I eventually will want to call myself a runner, so I become it's my identity. So if I become the type of person who takes these risks, or in those cases with your clients who are speaking up, I'm the type of person who speaks up and is confident. And so it's sort of like it seems like a little bit of a mental trick to identify yourself as that, and you kind of like grow into that personal expectation.
And it's a really powerful trick, to the point where we invite all of our clients to do that now when they're changing behavior. Is the question I used to ask is, what's your goal? Now the question I ask is, what's the identity you want to take on? Even if that identity doesn't feel right today, and use the analogy of being a runner, that really resonates with me, Chris. I am a runner, and I've been a runner for 20 plus years. And there was also a year that I had an injury and I couldn't run. But I still said I was a runner.
Yeah.
Because I identify as a runner, and I knew I was coming back to that once that injury healed. And once you take on the identity of, I am a person who speaks up, or I am a runner, or I am the kind of manager that invests in people, whatever that identity is for you. And then you start to our earlier point of taking the small behaviors that that bring that along. You take on that identity. And once you have an identity, that's really powerful. Then you become the person that it's much harder than for you to have, even if you had a bad day or a bad week or you get off track for whatever reason, it's much harder for you to set it aside because our identities shape who we are, and they shape our behaviors.
Yeah. And your company is shaped by the behaviors that are mimicked by the people who you lead as well. So the people that you delegate authority to make decisions will probably end up making decisions the way that you do in whatever, microcosm of the business they're in charge of. So it seems like it would behoove us to model the kind of decision making and I guess enlightened decision making and practice that's rooted in something beyond just shoot from the hip. We wouldn't want people under us in the shop. You wouldn't want a manager who's responsible for one store to just make flip decisions. But if that's the kind of way that you handle bigger decisions in the company, then it's going to be sort of like you've given approval for that type of behavior. And that's just something I guess I've seen in coffee, but it seems like something that must be true elsewhere. Does that sound about right for what you've seen?
Oh my gosh, yes. I've one of my first big lessons as a manager was as I took over as a general manager of a business early in my career. Curiously, my staff had a hard time executing on the things that I was having a hard time executing on. And so, like, one of the things I think you discover as a leader is as your weaknesses get magnified throughout the organization. So if you as a leader are not good at customer service, that shows up in the entire team. If you as a leader struggle with giving sincere feedback, that becomes the culture of the organization. That's not universally true with every person. Everyone has their own unique talents and skills, of course, but it does set the culture. And that's, I think, one of the reasons it's really important for us from a leadership standpoint and a business ownership standpoint to be really mindful about the identities we have and also the ones we want to take on and the behaviors we want to take on, because that's going to get magnified throughout the organization. The general manager, the owner, insert title here of whoever's listening to this conversation, sets the tone for what that culture is going to be in the organization. And good or bad, people are going to adopt that tone and that culture.
Yeah, and hopefully more good than bad for sure. And there's a lot of self-awareness that might come up as a result of being on the move all the time, and exercising some of that courage kind of gets you outside of your comfort zone, which means you get to see a different part of yourself and you get a little more self-knowledge in that. You might be revealing some parts of yourself that aren't as pleasant as you thought they might be to the tune of, okay, well, I guess I have to change this behavior, but it seems like a tangential benefit of all of this.
Yeah, and this is work that's worth doing. And if you come to a place where there's something you're not good at, I'm a big believer in Strengths Finder and the strengths work that folks like Lisa Cummings do. Leaning into our strengths, of course. And when you find things that you're not good at, of bringing people into the business who are really good at that so that they can help to build that kind of a culture and set that tone and to fill that space in the organization that you're not skilled at or not going to be good at. And that's really, really good work for all of us to do as leaders, is to figure out where those gaps are so that we can make sure that the organization benefits and that it's us working on the business versus us trying to be the business ourselves.
Yeah, so working on the business, and definitely want to have that mentality of being constantly tinkering with it and not just winding it up and seeing it run and then being like, why did this stop? I don't understand. You get a lot of people that are in that position where they want to purchase the formula and watch it run and somehow don't consider that it's a constant pursuit of, betterment. And I especially love the emphasis throughout this conversation on making small changes and making them as changes that are conscientious of who they impact and who they serve, and doing it according to your 2-year vision that you've written for yourself. I think all that we've talked about here has been really instructive, because it gets us out of our own heads, because every day can be filled with so many fires that need to get put out, and calls for attention on anything else but the vision. So giving ourselves permission to sort of get that 30,000-foot view again, and use that as a catalyst for our decisions is huge. As we move forward with this, as we feel inspired to take on some of these courage-building tasks and decisions in our organization, what might be some pitfalls that we could fall into as we move forward that would maybe sour us to this idea?
Well, I think there's all kinds of pitfalls, but the common ones are not moving. It's very easy to set this aside when it's a Tuesday morning and the line is out the door, and the person who was supposed to show for their shift at 7 a.m. didn't show because they're sick, right? And all of a sudden a day has gone by and you've been putting out fires, and how do you focus on the strategy? So I think that that's a really tough reality that all of us face in every organization, and coffee's no exception to that, right? And especially not an exception given all the realities of that. So I think that you said something really big a few minutes ago, Chris, is that this can be really lonely. And it's very easy to get extremely reactive in running a small business. And I think that's where there are people who are really, really good at coming back to the big picture, zeroing on the vision, being very mindful about the actions they're taking, make decisions generally in context of the things that are important to them. But it's hard, and it takes a lot of discipline. And I think it's a lot easier to find a community of people who are in a similar space. Maybe they're a little ahead of you, maybe they're a little behind you, but that can help you to stay in that mindset of moving forward. And so I'm a big believer in community, of finding other business owners that are around you, that you can tap into their wisdom, that you can help them to stay focused on what's important for you and your business, and you in turn support them. And there's a lot of organizations that do that formally, but you can also do that informally. I think that, and I don't know what is available in coffee on that, Chris, you probably will know better than I, but I think it could be as simple as what the next conference you go to, of building a couple relationships and saying, hey, what if the 2 or 3 of us, if you find 2 or 3 people that are at a similar place in their business, what if we checked in once a month over the phone, or twice a month, and set up a half-hour session and do a bit of a mastermind and support each other? And, we're not competitors. We're in different places in the market. What can we do to support each other to keep us moving forward on the things that are most important? You and I both do that, Chris. And most people I know who run successful businesses do that in some respect. Either they're part of a formal organization that does that, either they've done that for themselves, either they've connected up and they do that informally. But it's really hard to do it on your own. It's possible, but it's really hard. And I think it's a lot easier if you have a structured framework with someone who's checking in with you, and you've got someone who's supporting you and pulling for you, and also is able to say to you once in a while, hey, you're not doing what you said you were going to do. What's going on? Yeah. And that's really important too. You and I have had those conversations. Because we've done that for each other. And so I think that's I haven't found a way to do it for myself. I sure have tried and mostly failed. And that's why, a few years ago, I went out and looked for other people who are doing the kinds of things I'm doing, and formed a mastermind and got people together who will help me, and I can support them. And I think that in a world of the internet where we've all got digital access, it's very easy to feel like we've got that because we've got these devices where we see stuff on social media, and the illusion of connection is a lot easier to believe today because of all the email and because of all the social media. But the actual connection is in some ways a lot less than I think a lot of us want it to be. So being really intentional about finding a community to engage with in some way that'll keep you moving on this, I think for most people is a really good starting point.
Yeah, great first step. And hey, you're right. It has been very helpful to have that. And, that accountability aspect is something that sometimes we're a little bit afraid to do because we don't think people want it. But I mean, I think more people want it than would admit, because nobody in their life tends to know as much about what they do as their peers, but their peers are all busy. So once you all agree, like you say, to get together and talk, then you've got this really, you couldn't put value on it, because the honesty that you can get from it is worth, many, many nights of just self-reflection, just one outside perspective. And it could just be like in your hometown, even if it was just small business owners. And I think on this show, we've definitely talked a lot about the value of local resources, business people or even people within your own company that have a lot of resources that are untapped. So I love that you went there and encouraged us to get some accountability. And you also do that with coaching for leaders. You've got the academy, right? That has been very useful for a lot of people have gone through the academy. How long has that been running?
It's been running, 4 years now. Yeah. Yeah. It's, that's a big part of my work, is bringing leaders together into community. And actually, it's the kind of thing, Chris, I'd be curious, when folks listen to this conversation, like, people who want to do that should reach out to you and say, hey, maybe you could be a clearinghouse for people doing this in coffee. Of, hey, the kind of people who are listening to the show are already the kind of people who are thinking really proactively, who care a lot about providing a wonderful experience to customers, who care a lot about leadership, who want to run strong businesses. You've already put together a community of people who are thinking very thoughtfully about that. It'd be interesting of just, if there are people hearing this who want you to maybe do some of that, or help put people together, like, who reach out to you. I think that'd be fun. As another way for people to really get value from this community. And that the things that we are all missing in the podcast world. As popular as podcasts have become, it is still very much a one-way conversation. And that's something we've made a really intentional move in our business to have that be much more a two-way conversation. It'd be fun if there are folks out there who would want to engage with you and your community like that, who'd want to move on that. I'd be fascinated to hear. So yeah, let Chris know if that's something that's interesting to you.
Yeah, I bet there would be. And then I'd have a decision to make, and I'd have to employ some of these things that we've talked about, and to do that. And I find it interesting because the one-way conversation of podcasts is also sort of the within your own shop, there's only really one voice. Sometimes it's just your business and everyone knows everyone, and that outside perspective, again, is just so powerful. But this conversation is really helpful, and I appreciate you laying out these things, because it shakes us out of the day-to-day and shows us that there is a lot of return on the investment we put into having a tactical view of our vision and how it works to really help us make great decisions. You have a ton of amazing content on your podcast and on your website. How can people reach out to you, stay in contact, listen to your show, and just learn more from, starting from this conversation and onward?
Well, thanks for asking, Chris. There's two resources. The show's called Coaching for Leaders, and coachingforleaders.com is a good clearinghouse for pretty much every resource we've got on the site. There's two resources in specific I'd recommend, though, coming out of this conversation. One of them, I referenced Cameron Herold earlier and the conversation that I had a while back with him on Vivid Vision. He has a book of the same name. I will send you the link for folks if they're interested in pulling that, because I think that directly relates to this conversation. And what we didn't talk about in this conversation that he's really brilliant on is tactically, how do you do that? Like how to actually write that vision and do that for a business. The other resource I'd point people to is we have a free audio course on our website that is basically how to write your own personal vision. So the principles are similar to writing a business vision, but it's more of like, how would you do this for yourself? And you could take a lot of those principles and apply it to a business vision too. And so you can just go to coachingforleaders.com. And if you set up your free membership on the main page there, it'll give you access inside the courses part of the portal there. And there's a free course on how to create your personal vision.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dave. This has been wonderful, and I appreciate you coming back on the show and talking to us.
Always a pleasure. Can't wait for our next conversation.
Well, once again, I'm so glad to have had Dave back on the show to unpack this really important topic for us. Among the many great things that Dave shared, I think so critical to, first of all, have that vivid vision as he talked about. We have the link to that book that Dave mentioned in the show notes, Vivid Vision by Cameron Herold, and that would be something worth getting for sure. But having that vision and basing all of your decisions on that vision is so critical, but also this idea of putting together some kind of a real life manual for how you operate your business. It's not the business plan that you put together for the shop or that you originally had, but it's something that says basically, now that you're in it, how do you make decisions? What do these decisions between managers to baristas, baristas to customers, what does it look like to operate this company and have the decisions that people make within it reflect the vision and values that the company has? And that would be really an awesome first step, along with the idea of creating a community of people that you can have keep you accountable, which on this show we've talked about before, how owners and leaders, they can definitely benefit from a community of peers that understand the kind of day-to-day realities that leadership faces, and that would be a great place to start as well. So thank you so much, Dave, for joining us on the show. We really appreciate your wisdom and your insights on this topic. It's always such a valuable time to talk with you on the show. Now, if you want to learn more about what Dave does, you should go to coachingforleaders.com. Get your free membership there, and you will unlock a lot of resources that are just invaluable. The course that Dave mentioned is also there, as well as many, many other things that are really going to help you as a leader. And also subscribe to Coaching for Leaders on iTunes or Stitcher, etc., wherever you get your podcast. Coaching for Leaders is what you should be subscribed to and listening to. Now, if you want to reach out to me, you can do so by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com. Always love hearing from you, and I want to let you know that I'm trying to put together a question and answer episode, and I would love to hear your questions, and your question could be featured on the show, so hopefully we can get a Q&A episode out there by the end of the year, and that would be really fantastic to sort of hear what's on your mind and give you some answers to those questions. Now, also, Keys to the Shop offers consulting. That includes both over-the-phone coaching conversations that we can set up to help you walk through different stages of your career in your business's growth and development, or all the way to operational assessments in your shop in person, training with your employees and yourself. You can use the email chris@keystotheshop.com to reach out. We can set up a phone call and talk about the details. It would be an absolute honor to help you in your coffee business. Again, that's chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, I want to mention something to you all. It is that Coffee Fest, of course, is coming up in November 15th and 16th. Coffee Fest Pacific Northwest. It's a 2-day show. It's a brand new 2-day show, and I will be there speaking and judging. But within this really fantastic value-packed 2 days is specifically a course that I think you would do well to sign up for. It is an all-day interactive learning experience called Lean into Leadership, Drive Success and Culture, and that is happening at this Coffee Fest. The speakers are Jen O'Hare from Tiamat Leadership and past guest and friend Lee Safar of Elixir Specialty Coffee and Map It Forward. So this session is going to be focused on leadership, success, and culture. It's all about being an intentional leader, identifying blind spots, brainstorming with other leaders, and it's all designed specifically for the hospitality industry. So I'm going to link to this in the show notes directly to the description of the Lean into Leadership event happening on the 14th, Thursday. That's the day before Coffee Fest starts. So Thursday, November 14th, Coffee Fest is the 15th and the 16th. This is a great way to start off your weekend. If you can get into Tacoma early and do this, I would highly encourage you to do so. So Lean into Leadership, Drive Success and Culture, only at Coffee Fest, Pacific Northwest. Get there, and I hope to see you there. And so now this is the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I always appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I trust that this has really brought some value to your life and to your business. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.